What's going on, guys, and welcome back to my Friday Night SmackDown audio review for August 19th, 2022. I am Graham G.S. Matthews. Hope you guys are doing well and having a great weekend so far. Coming off what I think I've said this before a lot in recent weeks, but one of the best SmackDown shows of the year. And I've seen a lot of comments about how this show was really only one match and one moment or whatever, and the rest of the show was average. To me, this was a case where the crowd made the show. Without the crowd, this probably, to me, would have been an average SmackDown, but I really don't have any complaints coming off this episode at all. I mean, it wasn't the perfect episode. Not every match was a 5-star classic. It wasn't the greatest SmackDown of all time, but for the 1,200th episode, which they made a big deal about, they mentioned at the beginning of the show, how the first episode of SmackDown back in 1999, the pilot, in April of that year, not the first official SmackDown in August when it became a weekly show from that point forward, but back in April of 99 when they did their first show in New Haven, Connecticut, which I did not know took place here in Connecticut. That was their very first show. Tonight was episode 1200, 1200, which they do normally mention the fact, it's episode 1100 or episode 1500 of Raw tonight or whatever. They mention that on occasion. They put in all the graphics. They mention it many times on this show the special occasion that this episode was. And it's not like it was episode 1000 or episode 1500 as I mentioned. It was 1200, which was still an important milestone for the program, of course. And I thought the fact they mentioned that many times and made it feel important really enhanced my enjoyment of the show. And that was largely due to the fact, as I mentioned, due to the crowd as well and their enthusiasm in Montreal, Canada tonight. They'll be back into Canada on Monday. Edge and Damian Priest headlining that show. That's going to be great. That should be a real fun time. The crowd was white hot on this show for everything WWE did. Some things more than others, but I thought overall it was a very fun show, and it really further illustrated how much easier these shows have become to watch with Triple H in charge. Now, that's not to say, as I've said before, the blue brand specifically is drastically different than what it was even a month or two ago when Vince McMahon was still around. That's not the case at all, but if you watch these shows, specifically what they're doing and how they go about certain things, and it really is the small things that make the biggest differences on these shows. Specifically how they make the Intercontinental Championship feel important, how they film promos, what the promos, like what the material of the promos are, the superstars they're featuring, the superstars they're pushing. The presentation of the shows isn't drastically different. We still have the same theme song for SmackDown, the same overall look to the show. I don't think they should change Michael Cole and Pat McAfee as the commentators. I feel like that commentary team is great. Raw, I could do without Byron Saxton, but I like Corey Graves on the Raw commentary team. I like the other guy, I forget his name off the top of my head, Jimmy Smith. Jimmy Smith is the lead commentator for Raw. I think they do a good job. I think there are certain things they can do to change and enhance the overall presentation of these shows. But as of now, as far as creatively, I do feel like the shows are infinitely easier to watch. And I've seen that message kind of sent across all of social media, people that I've talked to who either don't watch on the weekly or do watch on the weekly. People have said the Raw and SmackDown shows are much more bearable than they were even a month or two ago, which is a great sign so far in the Triple H era of WWE creatively. So we start the show off with Ronda Rousey in the ring. Well, technically the show started with Michael Cole and Pat McAfee at ringside. They were talking about it being the 1200th episode of SmackDown. And then we see Ronda Rousey cross the camera. Now, I thought the way they shot this, and all the shit goes to Kevin Dunn for all the awful camera cuts, but you got to praise him as well for the camera cut here of Ronda Rousey walking across the camera. And, maybe it was a Triple H idea. Regardless, it was very well done. We see Ronda Rousey walk across the camera in the middle of the shot of Michael Cole and Pat McAfee, which we don't see usually. And then she gets in the ring. She's still suspended. Okay, so she's obviously, breaking the suspension, cutting a promo about, being the champion and coming to the show, and she's going to put the show on hold until she gets what she wants. Adam Pearce says no, has her arrested, and these arrests never actually go, full throttle. They never actually get full-on arrested for more than an episode of SmackDown, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. She was taken out of the arena and put in the cop car, and we found out later from Adam Pearce that he's not going to press charges. She was free. She did not show up for the rest of the show. So I think, honestly, so far, what they've done with Ronda has been well done. The funny thing was that, at least on this show, and even last week as well, Ronda Rousey got cheered. And that's not to say she was getting booed 100% before, SummerSlam when she was still a 100% babyface. To me, it's pretty clear that she is the full-on heel. And they might be doing something similar to her with her that they did with Becky Lynch a few years ago, where she kind of comes across like the Stone Cold Steve Austin in the women's division, which no one will ever actually reach those heights again. Becky was very popular in late 2018, early 2019, and even now. And Ronda Rousey, this angle is working for her. That's kind of what they're going for. And anyone that's really anti-authority will be automatically compared to Stone Cold Steve Austin, because he was the most obvious example of that back in the late 90s. But anyway, it seems to be having a similar effect, and that it's actually gotten people behind Ronda Rousey. And, I mean, this was a very hardcore crowd. If they didn't like Ronda, they would have booed her out of the building. I don't know if it's a fickle thing or whatever the case might be, but, listen, if it gets her more over in the long run, that really is what should be the goal here. The thing with Ronda was that she was never not over as a babyface. She just works better as a heel. So maybe that's the direction we're going in with her, where she hopefully stays heel, but people cheer her, whatever. I think that's where she does her best work. Her mic work here was not great. She clearly kind of struggled with a few of her lines and delivery of such lines and whatever. She's not great and organic in that way, but as far as her actions and how she comes across like a badass, they really strengthened that here. Her strengths are coming across like a badass in the ring and her mannerisms and stuff like that. And I thought they really highlighted that here, and that was well done. So I thought the opening segment was good. From there, we got our first match, the quarterfinals of the WWE Women's Tag Team Title Tournament. Natalya and Sonya Deville taking on Toxic Attraction's Gigi Dolan and JC Jane. Now, it was supposed to be Nikita Lyons and Zoe Stark. We found out earlier in the day, it had been reported by PW Insider that they were likely to be replaced by Toxic Attraction. And I was thinking it was a storyline thing, just because they were. I mean, the initial report that I saw on Twitter was that they were getting called up. I still don't think that's the case 100% yet, and honestly, I wouldn't call them up 100% yet. I don't know if they're, first of all, fully ready for that. Second of all, I also wouldn't call them up without Mandy Rhodes. Mandy Rose, that is. Not the long-lost sister of Cody Rhodes and Dustin Rhodes. I wait until after she loses the NXT Women's Championship to bring that entire act to the main roster. There's nothing wrong, though, with getting them early exposure on the shows by having them advance here and face off in the semifinals next week. I don't think they go all the way to the finals. That's totally fine. I'm happy they won here. More on that in a second. But yeah, apparently Zoe Stark was legit injured in that match on Tuesday, which I thought was a very good match with Mandy Rose for the NXT Women's Championship. As for Nikita Lyons, it was interesting. And the announcement of the fact that they weren't going to be in the tournament, like you would probably think to yourself, well, Zoe and Nikita Lyons are not a full-fledged team anyway. Why not find her a different partner from NXT? Well, not excuse, but what they said here on the show, and in Shawn Michaels' announcement that aired on his Twitter and on YouTube, which I didn't see on Twitter because he blocked me a long time ago. For whatever reason, I don't know. I actually just interviewed Shawn twice, and I enjoyed our conversation. Ask him on Twitter because I can. But anyway, they had said that Zoe Stark was injured, but Nikita Lyons was medically unavailable. Now, again, if she was injured, they probably would have said that. If she was hurt or whatever in storyline, they probably would have said that. It was a very interesting choice of words. We don't really need to go in depth with it, but make of that what you will, as far as the fact that they were in Canada tonight, and given on your certain status and certain things, you might not be able to cross the border. Now, the Usos were not on the show for not the same reason I would think that we're all thinking of, but probably due to the DUI stuff. They can't cross over into Canada, either one, if not both of them, due to those reasons. Because one of them, I think it was, pretty sure it was Jimmy Summer who had DUI, and they were back on TV like that week. And it was acknowledged kind of, but not really. They kind of brushed it under the rug, and that was it. But it did cost them the opportunity to be on the show. Nikita Lyons, it seems like it was a different, because they said medically unavailable. And Karrion Kross was also not on the show in person. Neither was Scarlett. So again, make of that what you will. And it also begs the question, which I have not seen anyone ask, is the fact that they knew they would be in Canada for this show. They promoted Nikita Lyons and Zoe Stark a week or two ago. They announced this tournament 2 weeks ago with them being in the bracket, maybe a week and a half ago on Raw. They knew their match would be happening on this show. Again, Zoe Stark, you can't foresee getting her. And I'm happy with the change, by the way. I'm happy with Toxic being in instead. They're an actual tag team. It did make for a heel versus heel team here, but Natalya's from Canada, so they were kind of behind her here, which I wasn't honestly 100% expecting. I know she's from Canada, but she's been so creatively damaged, it's impossible to care about her. But no, they were behind Natalya here. She wears her country on her sleeve, not literally, but she's very proud to be from Canada, so it made sense why they were behind her here, I guess. But you would think that they would know in advance that Nikita, if it's the reason that we're all thinking of, the fact that she's possibly not vaccinated, that she would not be on the show. Why advertise her if you're not sure if she's going to be on the show? The Zoe Stark injury, completely unexpected. You can't plan for that. But nonetheless, we got Toxic Attraction in their place. Instead, Gigi Dolan and JC Jane representing the group. No Mandy Rose, no NXT Women's Championship. So she was not on the show with them. But they did end up winning in what I thought was a fine match. There was one botch from Gigi Dolan early on, but beyond that, this was well wrestled. The crowd was into Toxic Attraction. They were happy they won. They weren't in Natalya, so it was a good dynamic with Natalya getting pinned here because it gave Toxic more heat going into their match next week in the semifinals with Raquel Rodriguez and Aaliyah. And why I like that matchup even more than Natalya and Sonya is that Toxic Attraction has history with Raquel from earlier this year. Not only did they cost her the NXT Women's Championship about a year ago at Halloween Havoc against Mandy Rose, who was still in possession of that championship, but Raquel also beat them to win the NXT Tag Team titles alongside Dakota Kai, who's also in this tournament over on the Raw bracket. She was in the front row alongside Bayley and Io Sky, right behind the commentators. That was well done. They didn't show up like at ringside. They're Raw superstars. Why technically would they be allowed to be there? So they bought a ticket. I thought that was well done. But yeah, Raquel and Dakota Kai back at Stand and Deliver beat Toxic Attraction to win those tag team titles. 2 or 3 days later on NXT TV, they lost the belts right back to Toxic. Dakota Kai got an NXT Women's title shot, I think, against Mandy Rose on TV. Lost, got fired a week or two later. So Raquel has history with Toxic. Her last match in NXT was with Toxic, so I'm looking forward to that. And I assume Raquel and Aaliyah advance. I wouldn't have them win the whole thing, but I assume they make it to the finals against Dakota Kai, Dakota Kai and Io Sky. So, fine stuff here. We got a couple of other segments that weren't actual matches I'll just mention here before I forget. We had the funeral of the New Day on this show, hosted by the Viking Raiders, which was not an in-ring segment. It probably would have failed if it did. There really wasn't much to this. It was just a video package of the Raiders having like this ritual and showing highlights of them attacking Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods. Whatever the hell this was, it was really well shot, and it was a really cool video package. But the real takeaway from this was not the package itself, which, again, I thought was well done, but rather the fact there was this mysterious woman, who really isn't all that mysterious. If you kind of look at the hair and whatever, you can kind of make out who it was. This mysterious female figure kind of helping Eric and Ivar through the ritual and putting paint on their foreheads and whatever. It looked like it was Sarah Logan. Sarah Rowe, now the former Sarah Logan of WWE, who is, I was going to say has not been seen since she got cut in the budget cuts during COVID early on, back in April of 2020, but she was actually in the Rumble earlier this year, and that was when Vince was running the company. She comes from NXT. It is very possible, with all the people they've brought back lately, that they bring back Sarah Logan, Sarah Rowe. Now, she isn't a must signing by any means. There's a lot of other women I would probably bring back or sign to WWE before her. She didn't have a lot of memorable matches in WWE, not even in NXT or on the main roster. I know she had indie experience, and I thought she was really good. I have yet to see like an above-average match from Sarah Logan in WWE. By the end, I really couldn't give a fuck about her because she was doing nothing on Superstars or Main Event or whatever with Dana Brooke. But honestly, if they brought her back as part of the act with the Viking Raiders, I would not have her be their mouthpiece, because the last time I heard her speak on the show, she just can't really talk all that well. She doesn't have to be their mouthpiece, but just being a part of the act, I would be fine with that. I feel like that would be a nice addition to their new heel act, and it would switch things up from what they were doing previously. So I would have no issue with that whatsoever. We also had another segment on the show, a couple of other ones too. Sami Zayn talking to Roman Reigns backstage before the Fatal 5-Way in the show that was previously announced earlier in the day to crown a new number one contender to the Intercontinental Championship. Sami Zayn has wanted his meeting with Roman Reigns backstage, the Universal Champion, the WWE, or rather undisputed WWE Universal Champion. Roman was on the show 2 weeks ago. Sami couldn't meet with him. The Usos told him no. It made sense that Sami was able to meet with him on this show because the Usos weren't here to stop him. So he walked into his office and they spoke for a few minutes, and I thought the entire interaction was fantastic. Sami is great. Roman's playing his role very well here. Roman did ask about Kevin Owens and told Sami to tell Kevin Owens that he doesn't owe him shit. And he didn't say shit, but he just said, I don't owe him anything. Because remember on Raw, when Kevin Owens attacked Drew, after Drew attacked the Usos, he kind of leaned over the ropes and told the Usos, tell your tribal chief he owes me one. And Roman then responded here by saying he doesn't owe him anything. So that gives me hope that we are indeed headed toward an Owens and Zayn tag team against the Usos for the tag team titles. I think that would be the money direction to go, the perfect route to take with this storyline. I was skeptical originally because we haven't seen Owens in a little while. He came back a week or two ago, and then he came back as a heel, like an aggressive, badass heel. It would be a little weird if they had Owens talk about this past week on Raw being the prize fighter again, going back to being the Owens of old and whatnot, only to have him turn face again. That would be a little strange, but I think it would work. People are ready to cheer Owens and ready to cheer Sami specifically from this show alone. I know they're not going to be in Montreal every week, but it's pretty clear Zayn is ready for that babyface turn. So I think an Owens and Zayn tag team, as we've been talking about really for months now, I'm not sure if I alluded to it here on the show, but people have been pitching this since like April or May, when Zayn first started interacting with the Bloodline. So that's where I hope this is headed. I don't know if it is, because Owens is still doing his own thing on his own and he's on Raw, but I hope that is the end game. It doesn't have to be a Clash of the Castle. I would honestly drag this out even further, whether it be to the October pay-per-view or Survivor Series or whatever. It doesn't have to culminate right now, but at some point it should, and I think it possibly could, culminate in Owens and Zayn taking those tag team titles from the Usos. And another segment on the show that was backstage, before I forget, we had a great promo from Karrion Kross. Now, like I said earlier, he was not on the show, did not appear even in person, so it leads me to believe he was not on the show for the same reasons that Nikita Lyons was not on the show. But nonetheless, I thought the promo itself was great. He kind of responded to Drew, calling himself on Raw not the chosen one, which he was 13 years ago. But he says how, since Drew's been back, he's been champion, he's won this, he's won that, Kross was discarded and whatever. Kind of just elaborating on what he said last week in his promo backstage on the show. And he went into further detail about it and whatnot. I thought this was really, really well done. The video package was great. And I'm not sure how much input he had in it and creating it and whatnot. Kross strikes me as a very creative individual. But I thought this was fantastically produced, and it got me excited for when Kross comes back as his first, comes back in the ring and whatnot, has his first in-ring entrance and has a match. I'm not sure when that's going to be. They might be holding off on that first Kross and Drew match until after the next pay-per-view, until after Clash of the Castle. I think that'd be fine. They only have 2 SmackDowns left until the pay-per-view. They have next week and the week after. I don't think they gave Kross and Drew away next week without advertising in advance. They could always announce it on Raw this week during a commercial. I think it's more likely they could do it on the Friday before the pay-per-view, but I'm not even sure if they're doing a SmackDown on that Friday before the pay-per-view, because the pay-per-view's on Saturday, and I don't know if they can do SmackDown or, I'm not even really sure. I haven't looked at the schedule, but unless they tape SmackDown ahead of time, I'm not exactly sure. It is possible they do it on the final Friday before the pay-per-view, if there even is a SmackDown that Friday and they don't just have a clip show instead. So anyway, back to the in-ring stuff on the show. Hit Row, all of Hit Row. We had Top Dollar, Ashante the Adonis, B-Fab, all interrupt Maximum Male Models. And they had everyone in the ring. Massey, Mansois, they had, I want to keep calling her Sophia Cromwell, but that's not what she is anymore from NXT. Her name is Maxine Dupree, and we had Max Dupree. So they were quickly interrupted. The crowd booed the shit out of their dumb act. They cheered Hit Row. Hit Row came out, attacked them, sent them flying from the ring, and then they performed their own song called We Back, which Michael Cole alluded to afterward. He goes, I think the name of the song is called We Back, because they said it like a million times. This is bound to get, if it hasn't, I'm sure it has, get a polarizing reaction online. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that didn't like this, and that's fine. I thought this was cool. We don't ordinarily see this sort of thing, if only because we don't see this sort of thing on the show. That's why I liked it. And I thought it was well done. It might not have been the greatest rap in the world, or the greatest song in the world, not the greatest live performance I've ever seen on the show. But I thought it was still well done, and it was cool, and they devoted time to it, and it reminded me of the segments they got in NXT. And again, like we talked about last week, it's not complete without Swerve Scott, obviously, without Swerve Strickland. But they're making the most of it. This was the original group before Triple H added him to the group. So I'm completely on board with it, and I think this was a good segment to kind of further establish them, and the crowd didn't boo it, so that was a step in the right direction, because usually this sort of stuff is booed relentlessly by live crowds. That was not the case here in front of a hardcore crowd in Montreal. That's a positive sign. Speaking of the Montreal crowd, again, they were the real stars of this show, but they were exceptionally hot in this next match, the Fatal 5-Way to determine Gunther's next Intercontinental Championship challenger at Clash of the Castle for Sami Zayn. They were exceptionally hot for Sami Zayn. facing Sheamus, King Corbin, Ricochet, and Madcap Moss. This was terrific stuff. The match itself was great. It got a ton of time. They were super hot for Sami, who was ready for that babyface turn, which I just got done talking about. And it was funny, when I saw the graphic on Twitter before the show, me and a lot of other people were saying, well, Sheamus has got to win. It's got to be Sheamus and Gunther at Clash of the Castle, which I'm happy that we're getting. But as soon as the match started and I heard the reaction for Sami, I was selfishly hoping that he would win instead. He did not take the pin here. Corbin did. But I'm thinking, it kind of makes sense if Sami does win. I mean, he's no threat to Gunther, obviously, but, he's trying to win championship in the bloodline, and he's trying to hold his own, and he ended up making it up to Roman at the end of the show by taking a bullet for him, or aka a Claymore from Drew, kick to the face. But I thought that would have made a little more sense, but you know what? Sheamus and Gunther, I'm not complaining. This sounds fucking sexy as hell. So Sheamus won following a fantastic 5-way, pinning Corbin with the bro kick. And the crowd is a bit deflated because, again, they wanted Sami to win in Montreal, but Sami looked great in defeat and was the star of the match. He got hurt, quote-unquote, at one point and then came back. But no, Sheamus and Gunther is going to be a hell of a brawl come Clash of the Castle. It will end the streak of there not being a single Intercontinental Championship match on pay-per-view for WWE since WrestleMania 37. Not even 38, 37 a year and a half ago, which is fucking ridiculous. Probably the longest stretch we've ever had without an Intercontinental title match on pay-per-view. It has to be. It has to be. So I'm looking forward to that. The problem is that I really want Sheamus to win that Intercontinental Championship because he wants to win it. The problem is, by Clash of the Castle, Gunther will have only been champion for 3 months. I want him to be champion a lot longer than that. Unless they have him lose. The thing is that even if they have him lose, I don't want him getting pinned quite yet. He went undefeated in NXT UK for God knows how long, 2 or 3 years. I think it would be a waste if they had him get pinned already by Sheamus within 3 months or 6 months or whatever within arriving on the main roster. So they could have Sheamus win. I would not be upset at that. I think Sheamus losing here would be better and then come back to these two and then have Sheamus win it down the road. I do want Sheamus as champion. I don't know if I want it right now because Gunther's just doing amazing work. Unless, again, they take the belt off of Gunther and then immediately promote him to the main event scene, which I'm not sure I would do right now anyway, with Roman being in the picture and Karrion Kross and whatever. But anyway, great stuff here. Liv Morgan had a match with Shotzi. The crowd didn't boo Morgan. She's still selling the arm injury, but they didn't really react. That was kind of what stood out to me here about Liv. When she made her entrance and the music hit, there was almost like no reaction. Now, I know they were still tired, the crowd was, coming off that 5-way, but the fact that she barely got any cheers or really any reaction at all is not good. And I honestly don't really know why. I know the booking of the SummerSlam finish wasn't perfect. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great, whatever. It wasn't the worst. She got booed 2 weeks ago. There were a pocket of people that kind of booed her last week on the show. I don't really get it. If we get a Shayna win out of this at Clash of the Castle, I'm not really complaining. I do think Liv should have held the championship or should hold the title for a little longer than 2 months. But if they want to pull the plug and move on, then I can't say I blame them because for whatever reason, crowds aren't really taking to her as we all thought that they would. And they were a month or two ago. That was the thing. She was incredibly over coming off of that title win of Money in the Bank. So, again, I'm not really sure what went wrong or whatever, but that was very weird to me. The match was whatever. Shotzi lost here per usual. It was a fine match. The focus to me was really on what happened afterward and Liv getting attacked by Shayna Baszler. And they made it a point to point out that Shayna is acting like the Shayna of old from NXT, which I thought was very interesting. So if Shayna wins the belt, no complaints here. I'm curious to see how this plays into the Ronda Rousey stuff. Shayna deserves a real run with any championship on any brand. We've already seen it in NXT, but I want to see it on the main roster because she deserves a chance and she's good. But anyway, I thought this was fine for what it was. The closing of the show, which never gets more than fucking 8 minutes because Roman's entrance lasts so long, it was advertised as a face-to-face between Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre. Now, they did technically go face-to-face, but it was far from the verbal encounter that we got between Drew and Kevin Owens on Raw, which was amazing. This wasn't exactly that. I hope we still get that between these two before the pay-per-view. I'm hyped for the match, and Drew's been booked well, and Roman's playing his role well. We haven't really seen the feud reach its apex yet, and I thought like the segment they had before Survivor Series 2 years ago was better than anything we've seen from these two so far in the build-up to this match at Clash of the Castle. So Drew did end the show standing tall. He was going to hit Roman with a Claymore. There were no Usos or Paul Heyman here to take the bullet for Drew. And that played into the fact that he hit Sami instead of the Claymore. Roman went after Drew, and Drew laid him out anyway. So Drew closed the show holding both belts. And Drew winning would be fine. I'm totally fine with Drew winning. I would prefer to see Roman win and to see someone else other than Drew take that championship or championships off of Roman Reigns. Just my opinion. But the fact that he did close the show with both belts gives me hope that we're not going to see Drew win it at Clash of the Castle. So I guess time will tell. But I thought it was a fine segment. I still hope we see more from these two in the ring together before the show, like a full-on verbal exchange, because this was way too short, and they got a couple of lines off, but not as much as Drew and Kevin Owens did on Raw. So hopefully we really see that true either contract signing or face-to-face or whatever. I mean, they haven't advertised Roman for next week, so I'm not sure he will be on next week, probably in 2 weeks or on Raw or whatever. Because I want to see like the real bad blood between the two. Mentioning the fact they had a match 2 years ago and Drew lost because of the Usos and whatever. They've kind of alluded to it on the show itself, not really, but I hope they do in the build-up to this match at Clash at the Castle. But overall, I thought it was a great show, like I said. When I called it one of the strongest SmackDowns of the year, I don't think that's an exaggeration. The show has been awful for the better part of 2022, so that really isn't much of a stretch. But I did thoroughly enjoy the show. I thought what they did with Ronda Rousey was well done. We got to see Toxic Attraction. They won their match. Hit Row had their performance, which I enjoyed personally. I thought the five-way was amazing. For me, the highlight of the night. The crowd was fantastic. Liv and Shotzi was fine for what it was, and the ending segment was solid. So thoroughly enjoyed the show. The 2 hours, more so this week than any other week lately or just in general this year, really flew by. And that's the feeling that you want with these shows. I feel like Raw would feel like that too if it was 2 hours and not 3, but I've just kind of given up on the fact many, many years ago that we're ever getting 2-hour Raws again. But again, this was solid stuff for what it was for the August 19th, 2022 edition of SmackDown. Thank you guys for checking out my review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content, including my SmackDown Lowdown review a little bit later today, and my Edge interview from yesterday, talking all about the aforementioned match on Raw coming up on Monday with Damian Priest in Toronto, his A&E documentary airing tomorrow night, and a lot more. So if you haven't already checked out that interview, please do so. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Have a great one, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.